Subscribe, like, and comment if you're ready to step into the darkest corners of real crime. Because once the story begins, there's no turning back. The morning the prison exploded. The first alarm went off at 5:42 a.m., slicing through the humid air of Machala Prison like a blade. Inside Pavilion C, men were already awake. Some stood frozen in their cells, gripping rusted bars. Others pressed their ears to the concrete walls, listening. The sound came again, metal crashing against metal, followed by shouting that echoed down the corridors. Then the power cut out. For a few seconds, the prison fell into darkness. When the emergency lights flickered on, the violence had already begun. Guards later said it felt like the building itself had turned against them. Doors slammed open where no keys had turned. Smoke crawled along the ceiling. Somewhere deep inside the prison, screams cut through the noise, then vanished just as quickly. By the time tactical units forced their way into Pavilion C, 13 inmates were dead. No warning. No clear explanation. Just bodies scattered across a cell block that had become a battlefield. Machala Prison sat on Ecuador's southern coast, a low concrete sprawl designed for order, but ruled by fear. Officially, it housed mid-level offenders, drug traffickers, extortionists, gang affiliates. Unofficially, it was a pressure cooker, holding men tied to rival criminal networks that had been at war on the streets for years. That morning, the war came inside. Police sealed off the compound as dawn broke, helicopters hovering overhead while sirens wailed beyond the prison walls. Families gathered outside, some crying, others screaming names into the air, hoping for an answer that wouldn't come. Inside, investigators stepped over broken furniture, overturned bunks, and blood-stained floors that told a story without words. 13 men had been killed in under 20 minutes. But what stunned officials wasn't just the number of dead, it was how organized the attack appeared. Colonel Andres Valverde, a veteran of Ecuador's national police, arrived on scene before sunrise. He had spent decades chasing cartels, dismantling gangs, and surviving ambushes. Yet as he walked through Pavilion C, his expression hardened. "This wasn't chaos," he said quietly. "This was planned." The victims came from two rival groups that had been locked in a silent power struggle for months. On one side were inmates linked to Los Lobos, a gang with deep ties to international drug routes. On the other were associates of Los Caneros, once dominant, now fractured but still deadly. For weeks, intelligence reports had warned of rising tension inside Machala Prison. Arguments over cell assignments. Smuggled phones intercepted. Whispers of retaliation. Still, no one predicted a massacre. One name immediately stood out among the dead: Diego El Ingeniero Maza. Maza wasn't supposed to be there. A former logistics coordinator for a coastal trafficking network, he had been quietly transferred to Machala just 10 days earlier. His move had been classified. Even some prison officials didn't know why he was suddenly relocated. Now he was dead, found near the showers with his prison ID still clipped to his uniform. To Colonel Valverde, that detail felt wrong. Killings inside prisons were brutal, but they were rarely careless. IDs were removed. Messages were sent. This time, Maza's identity was left exposed, almost as if someone wanted him to be recognized. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline. At 5:37 a.m., a guard reported a malfunction in the locking system on Pavilion C's east wing. For minutes later, cameras in that section went dark. At 5:42 a.m., the first alarm sounded. By 6:01 a.m., it was over. No guard fatalities. No weapons recovered. Whoever orchestrated the clash knew exactly how long they had. As news broke across Ecuador and then spread internationally, headlines called it the deadliest prison clash the city had ever seen. But inside the investigation room, officers were already realizing something more disturbing. Several of the men killed had no history of direct conflict with each other. Two had been scheduled to testify in unrelated criminal cases. One had recently requested protective custody. Another had been denied a transfer only days before the incident. This wasn't just a gang fight. It was a purge. Valverde ordered a deep dive into prison records, transfers, and phone logs. What they found raised more questions than answers. Key surveillance footage from the hour before the killings was missing. Guard shift schedules had been altered the night before, and a routine cell inspection plan for that morning had been quietly canceled. Someone on the inside had cleared the path. As investigators traced Diego Maza's final movements, they uncovered a detail that sent a ripple of tension through the task force. The night before his death, Maza had made a phone call from a contraband device, one that never appeared in the official seizure logs. The call lasted 47 seconds. Its recipient was a number linked not to another inmate, but to a former prison contractor who had vanished months earlier under suspicion of corruption. That discovery shifted the case from a prison riot to something far more dangerous. If Maza had been silenced, what did he know? And who was afraid enough to kill 13 men to keep it buried? Late that evening, as forensic teams continued their work, a junior investigator made one final discovery inside a storage room beneath Pavilion C, a room that wasn't listed on any official prison map. Behind a locked metal door, they found a stash of uniforms, radios, and access cards identical to those used by night shift guards. But the real shock came when they checked the serial numbers. Every single card had been authorized the same day Diego Maza was transferred to Machala Prison. And that's when investigators realized the massacre wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the cover-up. Because somewhere beyond the prison walls, someone had planned this long before the first alarm ever sounded. The silence after the screams. By the time the sun set on Machala Prison, the city was already whispering. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said the massacre was retaliation ordered from outside the walls. Others claimed it was a warning to anyone thinking of cooperating with prosecutors. Inside police headquarters, Colonel Andres Valverde shut out the noise and focused on what terrified him most. Not what had happened, but what was happening now. Silence. In the 48 hours following the killings, 3 inmates who were scheduled for questioning refused to speak. One claimed he'd seen nothing. Another asked for a lawyer and then withdrew his statement entirely. The third never made it to the interview room. He was found unconscious in his cell, alive but shaken, repeating the same sentence over and over. They know who talks. Valverde expanded the task force and brought in external investigators from Quito, men and women with no prior ties to Machala Prison. Trust was now a liability. Every guard, every administrator, every contractor became a potential suspect. Then, the disappearances began. The former prison contractor linked to Diego Maza's last phone call, Carlos Rios, had been missing for months. Now, when police finally tracked a financial trail to a coastal town near the Peruvian border, they arrived too late. Rios's apartment was empty. His laptop was gone. The landlord said he'd moved out overnight. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Back at Machala Prison, forensic teams finished cataloging the items found in the hidden storage room. The uniforms were clean. The radios were functional. The access cards had been used successfully on the morning of the massacre. That meant the killers didn't break in. They walked through. As investigators reconstructed the attack, a chilling picture emerged. At least 6 individuals dressed as guards had moved freely between cell blocks, directing inmates, unlocking doors, and controlling the flow of violence. The victims weren't random targets caught in a riot. They were selected. One by one, names were crossed off a list that no one had seen but everyone now feared existed. Among those names was a man still alive. Luis Calderon. Calderon was a low-profile inmate with a high-risk secret. Arrested for financial crimes, he had quietly agreed to cooperate with authorities months earlier. His testimony connected drug shipments, corrupt port officials, and laundering networks stretching far beyond Ecuador. For reasons that now felt deliberate, his transfer out of Machala Prison had been delayed twice. Valverde ordered Calderon moved immediately. The request was approved. Then it vanished. The transfer order was deleted from the system less than an hour after it was filed. IT logs showed the action came from an administrator's account, but the administrator denied ever logging in that day. Someone was rewriting reality in real time. That night, Valverde received an unmarked envelope at his office. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside was a single photo printed on cheap paper. It showed Pavilion C, taken from above. 13 red marks circled specific cells, and 1 blue mark circled Calderon's. On the back, a message had been written in neat block letters. The list isn't finished. Valverde didn't sleep that night. He stationed armed officers outside Calderon's cell and ordered constant surveillance. Cameras were restored. Guards were rotated. Every precaution was taken. Still, the feeling persisted, like watching a locked door while someone dismantled the walls around it. The next morning, a guard named Mateo Cruz came forward. Young, nervous, and visibly afraid, Cruz claimed he'd seen something the night before the massacre. A man in a supervisor's uniform entering Pavilion C without signing in. A radio call that didn't follow protocol. A phrase whispered into the static. Green corridor. Before Cruz could give a full statement, he asked for protection. Valverde promised it. 2 hours later, Cruz disappeared. His locker was empty. His phone was left behind in the break room, still charging. Security footage showed him walking toward the parking lot, then cutting out mid-frame, as if the camera blinked. It never came back on. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't just about controlling inmates. This was about controlling the truth. Pressure mounted from every direction. Media demanded answers. International watchdogs questioned Ecuador's prison system. Politicians issued statements while privately urging the investigation to move carefully. Valverde pushed harder. Tracing financial records linked to Carlos Rios, analysts uncovered payments made to shell companies connected to prison suppliers. Food contracts. Maintenance services. Security upgrades that never happened. The prison wasn't just compromised. It was owned. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. A technician restoring corrupted surveillance data recovered a fragment of audio recorded minutes before the massacre. It wasn't clear, but it was enough. A voice, calm, authoritative, giving instructions. Phase 3. No witnesses, especially Maza. The voice wasn't distorted. Valverde recognized it. It belonged to someone who had briefed him personally on prison security reforms just weeks earlier. Someone trusted. Someone powerful. As investigators rushed to confirm the identification, alarms sounded again at Machala Prison. This time, there was no riot. No screams. Just a locked cell. When officers forced it open, they found Luis Calderon alive, but barely. His legal documents were gone. His cooperation agreement had vanished. And carved into the concrete wall behind him were 3 words that froze the room. You were warned. Outside, as helicopters lifted into the night sky, Valverde understood the truth they'd been circling since the beginning. The massacre wasn't meant to end the investigation. It was meant to control it. And the person pulling the strings wasn't hiding in the shadows. They were standing in the light, close enough to touch. Close enough to strike again. And if Valverde was right, the next move wouldn't happen inside a prison cell. It would happen to someone on his team. The man who never touched the knife. Colonel Andres Valverde had spent his career hunting criminals who hid behind aliases and shadows. What he had never prepared for was the kind who hid behind credentials. The voice on the recovered audio belonged to Victor Salinas, a senior security consultant appointed by the Ministry of Justice. Salinas had designed prison reforms, advised on gang containment, and testified before international observers about restoring order to Ecuador's collapsing prison system. He had also signed off on Machala Prison's access card system. On paper, Salinas was the solution. In reality, he was the architect. Valverde moved carefully. Accusations without proof would collapse the case and possibly cost lives. Instead of arresting Salinas, the task force began watching him. Phone records revealed encrypted calls made minutes after the Machala massacre. Financial analysts uncovered offshore accounts receiving deposits that matched the timing of prison supply contracts. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. Salinas wasn't loyal to any gang. He was loyal to stability. For years, rival criminal groups had used prisons as command centers, leaking violence into the streets. Salinas' solution was brutal but efficient. remove the unstable elements, silence informants, and enforce order through fear. Machala wasn't a failure. It was a demonstration. But even controlled systems crack under pressure. The mistake Salinas made was underestimating Luis Calderon. Though shaken, Calderon hadn't broken. While recovering under guard, he remembered something crucial. During the weeks before the massacre, he'd been forced to attend security interviews conducted by a man who never asked questions. He listened. Calderon described Salinas perfectly. With that testimony, Valverde finally had leverage. An arrest warrant was prepared quietly. No announcements. No press. The operation was set for dawn. But Salinas was always one step ahead. When officers arrived at his apartment, the door was unlocked. Inside, everything was immaculate. No computers. No documents. Just a single file folder left on the dining table. Inside were copies of classified reports, internal memos, and surveillance photos. Photos of Valverde's team. Salinas had been watching them too. Panic spread through the task force. If Salinas had vanished, where would he strike next? Would he disappear forever, or force a final confrontation? They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, during a televised government hearing on prison violence, Salinas walked into the room.
Calm, composed,
smiling. He requested permission to speak.
Live.
Before anyone could stop him, he addressed the nation. He spoke of necessary evils, of hard choices made to prevent greater bloodshed. He didn't deny Machala. He justified it. 13 lives, he argued, had prevented hundreds more deaths across Ecuador. The room fell silent. That was when Valverde stood. He played the audio recording. He displayed the access card logs. He revealed the offshore accounts. And finally, he introduced Luis Calderon, alive, standing, and staring directly at Salinas. For the first time, Salinas's smile vanished.
He was arrested on the spot.
The fallout was immediate and explosive. International agencies intervened. Prison officials resigned. Contracts were frozen. Salinas was charged not with murder, but with conspiracy, corruption, and abuse of authority, crimes that carried enough weight to bury him for life. Or so everyone thought. At trial, Salinas never denied his actions. Instead, he reframed them. His lawyers argued he had never killed anyone. He never touched a weapon. He never ordered a specific death. He only created conditions. The jury deliberated for weeks. When the verdict came, the courtroom gasped. Guilty, but on reduced charges. Salinas was sentenced to 12 years. Not life. Not justice, according to the families of the dead. As he was led away, Salinas turned to Valverde and spoke softly. "You'll miss me," he said, "because I was the one keeping the monsters quiet." Months passed. Machala Prison was restructured. Guards were replaced. New oversight committees were formed. Violence dropped for a while. Then, 3 months after Salinas entered prison, another incident occurred. A single inmate was found dead in a different facility. No riot. No gang clash. Just one man. On the wall beside him, carved into concrete, were 3 words. Green corridor complete. Investigators froze. That phrase had never been made public. Only one person outside the task force knew it. Victor Salinas. Valverde visited him the next day. Salinas sat behind glass, relaxed, almost amused. "You locked up a system," he said. "Not the man who built it." Valverde realized the truth too late. Salinas didn't need freedom to control the prison network. He had already trained others to continue the work. The deadliest gang clash in Machala hadn't been an ending. It had been a warning. Because prisons don't just hold criminals. They create them. And somewhere inside Ecuador's prison system, the list was still unfinished. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes after the silence.